Imagine standing in a room full of people who think you are a cockroach, only to realize you are the one holding the deed to the building they are standing in. Elena thought she was playing a game of chess against a pawn, but she was actually playing against the grandmaster who owned the board, the pieces, and the very air she breathed. When she forced me to sign that postnuptial agreement with a smirk on her face, she believed she was sealing my poverty. She had no idea she was actually signing the death warrant for her family legacy, handing me the keys to a $2 billion kingdom she did not even know I possessed. This is the story of how greed blinded a dynasty and how a single piece of paper became the most brutal backfire in the history of the elite. The Sterling-Vane family did not just have money. They had the kind of history that made them believe they were genetically superior to anyone who had not inherited a mansion. When I married Elena, I was the quiet software engineer with a modest salary and a wardrobe that consisted mostly of plain gray t-shirts. Her father, Richard, treated me like a stray dog Elena had brought home out of pity. At every dinner, every gala, and every holiday, the message was clear. I was a guest in their world, and guests could be asked to leave at any time. I let them believe it. I let them laugh at my thrift store shoes while I quietly managed a decentralized tech empire that was eating their traditional shipping business for breakfast. I had built a fortune of $2.1 billion under a series of anonymous shell companies and trusts, all while living in a guest house on their estate. The tension reached a breaking point 3 years into our marriage. Elena had become increasingly distant, her eyes always glued to her phone, her laughter reserved for people I did not know. One evening, she sat me down in the library of her father's house. Beside her sat Julian, the family shark of a lawyer. They pushed a thick stack of papers across the mahogany table. It was a postnuptial agreement. Elena claimed it was for our protection, but the terms were a declaration of war. It stated that in the event of a divorce, I would waive all rights to any assets she inherited or earned, and I would be entitled to a flat sum of $50,000 for every year we were married. In exchange, she would waive any claim to my earnings. They thought they were being clever, ensuring I could never touch the Sterling-Vane millions. I looked at the document and saw the first major opening for a move they never saw coming. I told them I would sign it on one condition. I wanted a clause added that stated if either party was found to be unfaithful, the cheating spouse would forfeit 75% of their personal net worth to the other. Julian laughed, a dry, condescending sound. He looked at Elena, who shrugged with an air of boredom. They thought I was a desperate man trying to secure a future by clinging to a fidelity clause, thinking Elena was my only ticket to wealth. They agreed instantly. This was the first major plot twist. By adding that clause, I was not protecting myself from her family money. I was setting a trap for the massive fortune I was hiding, knowing full well that Elena had been seeing someone else for months. As the months passed, the atmosphere in the house grew cold. Elena stopped pretending to care about my career. She would mock my small desk and my second-hand laptop, unaware that through that very laptop, I was orchestrating the largest tech acquisition of the decade. She spent her days with Julian, the lawyer, under the guise of legal consulting. I knew they were more than just professional associates. I had private investigators documenting every secret dinner, every weekend getaway to the Hamptons, and every expensive gift he bought her using her father money. I waited, watching the evidence pile up, while her family began to face financial tremors they could not explain. The second major plot twist occurred when I realized that Julian was not just Elena's lover. He was actively embezzling from the Sterling-Vane shipping empire to fund his own gambling debts. He was using Elena as a shield, knowing Richard would never suspect his daughter-favored advisor. I did not report him. Instead, I used my anonymous investment firm to quietly buy up the debt Julian was creating. I became the secret creditor to my own father-in-law. Every time Julian stole, he was essentially selling a piece of the Sterling-Vane legacy to me. Elena was so blinded by her romance with the shark that she did not see her own ship sinking. To further test the waters, I decided to stage a professional failure. I told Elena that the small startup I worked for had gone bankrupt and that I had lost my modest life savings in the process. This was the third major plot twist. Her reaction was even more brutal than I expected. Instead of offering support, she threw a party. She told her friends that she was finally free of the burden of a loser husband. She stopped coming home entirely, staying at Julian's apartment and posting pictures of her lavish life on social media, completely ignoring the fact that we were still legally married. She thought I was at rock bottom, making me the perfect target for the final phase of her plan. The fourth major plot twist came when Richard, Elena's father, received a hostile takeover bid for his entire company. The bidder was an anonymous entity called Apex Holdings. Richard was panicked. He called an emergency family meeting and demanded I stay out of the room, calling me a jinx. Little did he know, I was the one who had signed the offer letter. I sat in the kitchen, listening through the walls as they scrambled to find investors. They were desperate. They needed a cash injection of $500 million to stay afloat. Julian suggested they take out a high-interest loan from a private lender he knew. That lender was also me, operating through another layer of shell companies. I was now both their predator and their only supposed savior. While the family business was crumbling, Elena decided it was time to end our marriage. She wanted to marry Julian and start their own dynasty with what was left of her father's wealth. She served me divorce papers at the Sterling-Vane annual summer gala, in front of the entire East Coast elite. This was the fifth major plot twist. She stood on the stage, took the microphone, and announced that she was finally divorcing the man who had brought nothing but bad luck to her family. She called me a parasite in front of hundreds of people. The crowd whispered and sneered. I stood there, taking the humiliation with a calm smile. I handed her the signed divorce papers right there on the stage, along with a small, sealed envelope. The sixth major plot twist happened the moment Julian opened that envelope later that night. He expected to see a humble plea for more money. Instead, he found a complete dossier of his embezzlement, his affair with Elena, and the proof that I owned every single cent of the debt the Sterling-Vane family had just signed. But the real kicker was the postnup. Because I had proof of Elena's infidelity with Julian, the 75% clause was triggered. However, since they thought I was broke, they expected me to get 75% of nothing. They had forgotten that the clause applied to both parties. Elena's legal team had drafted the document to protect her assets, but they failed to realize that the clause applied to her entire personal net worth, which included her future inheritance that had been accelerated by her father's recent financial restructuring. The legal battle that followed was a bloodbath. In the discovery phase of the divorce, the court required a full disclosure of all assets from both parties. This was the seventh major plot twist. When my legal team submitted the documents, the room went silent. The judge actually had to put on her glasses to read the numbers. $2.1 billion in liquid assets, real estate, and tech patents. Elena's face turned a shade of white I had never seen before. Her father fainted in the front row. They realized that by trying to screw me out of a few $1,000s, they had triggered a clause that now required Elena to pay me 75% of her remaining net worth, while I owed her nothing because she had been the one to break the fidelity clause. But the most brutal part was yet to come. Because Julian had been complicit in the infidelity and the fraud, I used my position as the primary creditor of the Sterling-Vane empire to call in all their loans simultaneously. The eighth and final major plot twist was the total dissolution of their legacy. I did not just take their money. I bought the Sterling-Vane ancestral estate at a foreclosure auction for pennies on the dollar. On the day they were forced to move out, I pulled up in a modest car, still wearing my plain gray t-shirt. Elena stood on the porch, weeping, begging for a second chance, claiming she had always loved me. Julian was being led away in handcuffs for the embezzlement I had finally reported to the authorities. I looked at Elena and reminded her of the night she forced me to sign the postnup. I told her that she was right about one thing. The document was indeed for our protection. It protected me from spending another day with a woman who valued a bank account over a human soul, and it protected her from ever having to worry about what to do with $1 billion again. I watched as the movers took away the last of their gilded furniture. I did not live in the mansion. I donated it to a foundation that provides housing for struggling families, the very people the Sterling-Vanes had spent decades looking down upon. the backfire was complete. Elena moved into a cramped two-bedroom apartment with her mother, working a retail job she despised. Richard never recovered from the shock of losing his empire to the man he called a cockroach. I went back to my life, but this time I did not hide. I continued to build, to invest, and to innovate, but I never forgot the lesson learned in that library. True power does not need to shout. It does not need to humiliate others to feel large. It simply waits for the greedy to trip over their own shadows. The legal community still talks about the Sterling-Vane postnup as the greatest cautionary tale in matrimonial law. It is studied in universities as a masterclass in how a document designed to trap a victim can become a cage for the predator. I sometimes see Elena's name in the news, usually associated with some desperate attempt to reclaim her social standing, but she is a ghost in a world that has moved on. The $2 billion she thought she was protecting herself from is now being used to build schools and hospitals. The fortune she tried to hide from me ended up being the very thing that stripped her of everything. In the end, it was never about the money for me. I had more than I could ever spend long before I met her. It was about the truth. It was about showing a family that thought they were gods that they were just as vulnerable as anyone else. They lost their home, their name, and their pride because they could not imagine that a man without a fancy title could have more value than their entire family tree. I still wear the same gray t-shirts, and I still work on my laptop late into the night. The only difference is that now, when I look at a legal document, I do not see a threat. I see a mirror that reflects exactly who the person on the other side of the table really is. The final irony is that Elena actually tried to sue to have the postnup invalidated, claiming she was under duress when she signed it. The judge laughed her out of court, pointing out that her own hand-picked lawyer had drafted the document and that she had celebrated its signing with a public party. She was caught in a trap of her own making, a victim of her own arrogance. She had tried to play a game of high-stakes poker with a man who already owned the casino. And as the house always does, I won. Now, when I walk through the city, I see the buildings that used to bear the Sterling-Vane name. They have been rebranded, repurposed, and revitalized. The shadows of the past have been washed away by a new era of transparency and merit. I realized that the best revenge was not just taking their wealth, but showing the world that they were never fit to hold it in the first place. The fortune I hid was not just money, it was a test of character. Elena and her family failed that test in the most spectacular and public way possible. Their legacy is gone, replaced by something far more valuable, a reminder that the most brutal backfires are the ones we build for ourselves.